Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. As we've been in the book of Job, we've had a lot of opportunity to reflect on and think about suffering. Job himself had suffered quite a bit. He had lost his children, he had lost much of his possessions, he had been afflicted with these boils from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. His world was basically crashing down around him. And the book of Job is all about him and his friends kind of reflecting on what's going on and trying to wrestle with the reason and the purpose for this suffering. And we've been able to talk about suffering quite a bit in our devotions as we looked at the loneliness that suffering brings, the fact that sometimes we are afflicted with things that last a long time and how to deal with that. We talked a lot about suffering. But then when we get to our reading today in Acts chapter 14, we see a man who is in a whole class all by himself, the Apostle Paul. This was a man who was not afraid to suffer. He was not a man who would run from suffering. He would not run from persecution and difficulty and stress and hardship, but oftentimes ran right into it. As we see in our reading today, in Acts chapter 14, him and Barnabas come to this place called Lystra, and at first they're well received. As a matter of fact, because of the healing of a lame man, the people started treating Paul and Barnabas as though they were gods. They called Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes, and they wanted to offer up sacrifices to them, and they had to work really hard to get the people not to do that. They're like, we're trying to get you away from these false gods and trying to turn you to the living God. Don't offer up sacrifices to us. But things turn real quick as Jews from Iconium and Antioch come and stir up the crowds against them. And whereas the crowds were once wanting to make them gods, now they stone Paul even to almost the point of death. And as the disciples are standing around him, he almost dies, but then he's revived. And guess what he does after that? He gets up and he goes right back into the city. He stays there the night, and yes, he does leave. He goes to Derbe, but after having a successful ministry there in Derbe, he goes back to Lystra, and he even goes to Iconium and Antioch, the two places where these Jews had come from that stirred up the crowds and had him stoned. And so Paul was the type of person who would not try to run away from suffering, difficult, and hardship. He felt like that was part of the package deal. It was something that he had to undergo. And so as we think about this, as we're comparing the book of Job, where you have a righteous man suffering and really struggling with it, and then in the New Testament with the Apostle Paul, who's also a righteous man who was suffering, but at the same time was just going headfirst into it, what was it that Paul had going for him that he was able to suffer so boldly for Christ and for God? I think it goes back to this idea of him being on a mission. Paul always had this mindset of being on a mission, always having a goal set before him. And I think that helped him when it came to this idea of suffering. It wasn't that Paul enjoyed suffering. Of course he didn't. He was not a person who was a glutton for punishment or anything like that. He was not just suffering for the sake of suffering itself, but he was a person who was looking ahead. He was looking to an eternal prize that was before him, and that was what was motivating him to endure even though he was suffering. And he talks about this prize at the end of his life in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where he says in verse 6, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing." So Paul was living for and looking towards this crown of righteousness that he knew that God had prepared for him. And so he says, I've fought the fight, I've kept the course, I've kept the faith, and I'm ready to receive that crown of righteousness. And so Paul was able to endure suffering, and not only endure suffering, but actually enter into it willingly, because he was on a mission, because he had a goal, an eternal goal that went beyond this life. Even in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, he talks about this. In verse 16, he says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory, far beyond all comparison. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." And there's the heart of how Paul was able to make it through these sufferings and even go into them willingly. He realized that this momentary light affliction, which, as we read his story, we would hardly call it light affliction, but he saw it as light affliction compared to the glory that was coming. And he knew that it was a temporary affliction compared to the eternal glory that was coming. And that was Paul's secret. That's how he was able to suffer and even go into suffering willingly, is he looked beyond this life. He looked to what he was trying to accomplish. He looked to eternal things. He understood that the little bit of suffering that he was enduring in the present moment was going to work out for him later on to his benefit, as he would enjoy eternal glory as a result. And so we can kind of join with Paul in this relationship with suffering, if we can just have the attitude of Paul and the mindset of Paul. And if we too could just look at our lives as just a stepping stone, as just a short journey that we're going on, or as he would relate it, as a race set before us, and in which there's a prize at the end. And we're running hard, we're running fast, we're trying to acquire that prize. And as such, we're willing to suffer hardship in the present moment. Much like a person who's running a race. It's not comfortable running a race. You're hot, you're sweating, your muscles are cramping, your feet hurt perhaps, your chest is probably hurting, maybe you have side cramps, whatever. But you're willing to endure all that because you have a prize waiting for you at the finish line. And you're willing to endure those things. And Paul had that attitude, and if we had that attitude as well, perhaps we wouldn't be quite as turned off by suffering or averted by suffering in our walk before the Lord. So these are just some things to think about today. Hopefully they were helpful to you. I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.